Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillahi wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillahi amma ba'd. So inshallah, in our today's session of our training series. So inshallah, in our today's session of this our training series, we'll discuss the topic of problem of evil. And those of us who have this experience that when we talk to non-Muslims, so this topic often comes up, that they point out to different negative experiences and encounters in their life, and they sort of try to justify their disbelief in God on the basis of these negative experiences. And sometimes they say that, look, I went through such and such difficulties, I was in such and such hardships, I was going through these financial crises or these family issues, and I was praying to God, and he never replied to me. He did not come to rescue me. And from that point onward, they started to develop this, if you like, this animosity against God, which ends up in their complete rejection and disbelief in God. Obviously, we are not trying to claim that we have the absolute answer for why those things happen to those people. And we do not have any claim to be able to explain every single thing which is happening in this world. And nor we are trying to belittle the sufferings and hardships of people. We sympathize with the people who are having hardships and sufferings in their life. But all we want to basically do is that we just want to share with the people an Islamic perspective, that how do we see all of these quote unquote negative events in life. So the reason I mentioned this, that we should be very clear that what are my limits and what is my role. Okay, so let's inshallah see that what we can say on this issue. So first and foremost, let's look at the classical way in which this problem is described, this problem of evil. As you can see on the screen, they say that how can there be an infinitely loving and infinitely powerful God, yet there have been so much evil and suffering in the world? If God is love, and I use this term on purpose because obviously that is how our Christian friends, they would say God is love. So if God is love and he wants to eradicate evil, but he cannot do it, then he is not all powerful. And on the other hand, if he is all powerful and he can eradicate the evil, but still he does not do it, then he is not a loving God. So they basically describe God with these two attributes, love and his power. And they say that how these two things are compatible. If he is loving, he must do something about these evils and sufferings. And if despite his power, he's not doing anything, then we cannot say that he is loving. And if he wants to do and he cannot do, then we cannot say he's powerful. In either of these two cases, the God which is preached, at least by the Christians, we cannot justify the existence of this God. And by the way, I'm not trying to criticize the Christian understanding at this stage, but that's what the problem is. So inshallah, we'll see that as a Muslim, what should be at least one of the approaches. Obviously, I'm not saying that I'm going to discuss with you this is the only approach. This is one of the approaches, inshallah, which we can take when we deal with this kind of encounters. So let's inshallah see. First and foremost, we need to point out that in this approach, there are fundamental problems in the approach itself. And what are those problems? Number one, that if all of these evil or bad things are happening, they do not disprove the existence of God. Yes, at max you can say that this God is not loving God. And that is understandable. You can say this much. But on the basis of problem of evil, we cannot simply dismiss or disapprove the existence of God. So this is the first point, that there is no logical connection between the existence of evil and existence of God. That is the first point we want to highlight. That yes, you can say that this God is not loving, this God is not a good God. You can say all of that. But you cannot say because of the problem of evil that God does not exist. It does not logically, you can say, follows from this paradigm. Second point, when they are formulating this problem of evil, in their minds, they have reduced all the attributes of God just to two, that God is love and God is powerful. But as a Muslim, we know and we believe that God has many attributes. Reducing God just to love and powerful, this is the root cause of this problem. For example, we believe as Muslim that God is infinitely wise as well, and he is infinitely knowledgeable as well. So problem of evil or these negative events in our lives, they are not incompatible with the wisdom of God, at least at a rational level. And in order to clarify this point, you can give different examples from the day-to-day life. For example, I mostly use these two examples, but you can use any of the examples. One example is that a doctor amputating someone's hand. Now, for example, if someone has developed some sort of cancer, may God protect all of us, and it has gone to that stage that if that particular organ, it may be hand, it may be feet, it may be leg, and we all know that these things are happening around us, that they have to go through a surgery in which they need to amputate that particular organ in order to save the life of that person. Now, if you just look at this thing in isolation, that someone's organ is amputated, or you just simply say that a bunch of people, they have just cut off the hand or feet of such and such person. Just this much information, it sounds very evil. But when you give the complete information that those bunch of people, they were doctors, and in their knowledge and wisdom, they knew that if they do not do this step, this person can die. This person can die a miserable death. In order to save his life, this is what they have to do. Another example, those of us who are parents, when we take our children for immunization, no, obviously no child likes that experience of when they insert that needle, they hate that. And when they look at that doctor or the nurse, they would consider that person as an evil person because they are giving them this pain. But we as parents and doctor, both of us, doctor and the parents, because of their knowledge and wisdom, they know that this pain is good for my child. If he would not, if he would go through this pain for this short amount of time, it will give him benefit for his entire life. So what I'm trying to highlight is that when things happen in life, not all of them, but in many cases, they are just
आज बस आज 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 ना के प्रिंटर में नहीं देते मैं आज में नहीं मांगूंगा.
Sorry, there was some problem in the someone's mic was not muted. So I was saying that when these things happening in life, when we look at these events in the same way, as I said before, that you just say that a bunch of people are just giving torture to a person and just amputating his hand or feet. This is half information. The complete thing is that what is the knowledge and wisdom behind all of this act. So what I'm trying to highlight is that many a time when things happen in our life, they appear to be evil, they appear to be negative, but they are not necessarily the evil things. They are happening for a greater good. So, but if we reduce God only to these two attributes, that he is loving, he is powerful, then definitely we cannot explain the existence of evil. And let me point out this thing. We all know that this atheism and agnosticism is on the rise. And it is a global phenomenon. It's happening everywhere. But at the same time, it is happening predominantly in the Western societies. And the reason is, in these societies, most of the people, they are exposed to one religion, or at least at one stage in their life, they used to belong to that one religion, and that is Christianity. And within Christianity, when you define God by saying that God is love, then you do not have any mechanism that how would you make the evil compatible with this loving God, until you take the holistic understanding of God, as Islam says that yes, God is loving, yes, God is powerful, but at the same time, God is wise and God is knowledgeable. And the action of a wise and knowledgeable person or entity, it may appear to someone as a negative or evil action, but it is not necessarily the case. Right? Let's move on. Understand the point. Right now, we are only highlighting the problem in the approach. Okay. So another problem is that for example, another problem is this, that what is the criterion which we are using to label something as good or evil? And the reason for this point is this. In order to label something as good or evil, there are two conditions. Two conditions. And they are that if you want to say that this thing is good or this thing is evil, you have to have the perfect knowledge of the future. without having the perfect knowledge of the future, on what basis you can say that something is good or evil? And at this point, you can give the example of Yusuf alayhi salam, Joseph, the prophet Joseph, because his story is mentioned in the Quran and in the Bible as well. And we know that every single thing happening in the story, it sounds like very negative and quote unquote evil. For example, when the brothers of Yusuf, they are jealous of Yusuf and they end up throwing him in a well. And then from that well, he was sold as a slave. And then, as we all know the story, that he was thrown into prison. Now, if you just look at those early parts of the story, that when these events were happening, would you not say that, look how evil things are happening to Yusuf? Being thrown into well, being sold as a slave, and being thrown into the prison without any crime. Because he was having such a noble character and he was accused of misbehaving with the wife of the king. So if we do not know the end, and we all know what is the end of the story, the end of the story is that Yusuf, he got this high status in the court of Egyptian king. And as a result of that, he was able to invite his entire family and they all dwell in Egypt. And that is how Bani Israel, the children of Yaqub alayhi salam, how those 12 tribes of Jacob, how those 12 tribes dwell in Egypt, and how the whole nation has a history of prosperity. Obviously, after that, we know the dynasty change and then they became the slave, but at least at that time when these things were happening. So what I'm trying to say is this. Sometime when events are happening like a domino falling one after the other, we do not know the end result. And we can all relate from our own lives that at one point something happened to any one of us and that appeared to be a bad or evil thing, but that caused a greater good in our life. And this is not something I'm just saying to fantasize the whole thing. No, these things are happening to all of us. For example, you applied for a job and you were looking for a job desperately, but you were rejected, you were refused, you did not get that job. Now, when this thing happening, it appears to be evil. But later on, you got a job which was way better than the job for which you were rejected. Now, had you been accepted for the previous job, then you would not have been applying for the job anymore, and you would not be able to get this better job. It may sound like a very simple example, but that is how the life is. So this is another problem in the approach, that you do not have a justifiable criteria to label something as good or evil. Why? Because it requires the perfect knowledge of the future, which no one possesses other than God Almighty. Another problem in the approach, complete focus on this life. You know, when people are saying that this bad thing happened to me and this evil thing happened to me, they have just completely zoomed in this life. They are just focusing on this life. And they do not have the holistic picture in which this life is just a tiny part of a long continuum of life. We have discussed this topic in a previous session. Obviously, when you mention this point, it would initiate a discussion of afterlife necessarily. if other person does not believe in the afterlife. But obviously, when we look at life in a holistic way, in which life is not just the life which we're having right now. There's going to be an infinite life after death. And because the place of this life in this bigger picture of holistic understanding of life, the role and place of this life is, it's a test. What would you expect in a test if not calamities? And by the way, just a side point. By and large, we cannot say that life is just, these miseries and negative things. Yes, there are negative things in life, but there are predominantly positive things in life as well. So it would be unfair. It would be unfair just to define the whole life with miseries and sufferings. We are not saying that there are no problems. There are problems in life, but life is, it would be unfair to define life just with this one title of problem, evil, and suffering. So anyhow, this was just a side point. Okay. So because life is a continuum, and this part of our life is a test. And that is the reason when things are happening in this life, that divine examiner, our creator, he has given us the freedom, the free choice. And lot of those sufferings, lot of the suffering, not all of them, lot of the suffering, they are a result and consequence of us using our free will in an inappropriate way. Yes, there are natural disasters as well, but at the same time, there are two types of evil, which we call the quote unquote evil. And majority of them are the result of our own hands. Bima kasabat aydihim. Allah says in the Quran, what your own hands have earned, what we are doing with our own free choices, that is causing all of that. And because this life is a test, and because this life is not meant for the result, for this reason, we do not see God interfering unless for two reasons. Either God interferes to give us a wake-up call, and sometimes God interferes because some people, with their free choices and with the abuse of their free will, they become a risk for the survival of other people. Then they have to be eliminated. Otherwise, you can see all around us, people are doing all sort of things, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting that happen. Because he says in the Quran that if God was to intervene and if God was to punish people for their bad deeds, there would not be a single soul alive on this earth. So it is actually one aspect of God's mercy that he's not intervening when people are immediately, when people are making the wrong choices, he gives us time that we may come back, we may repent. He gives us wake-up calls. So this is the problem in this approach, that when you only focus on the life which we're having right now, then yes, it becomes very difficult to make sense of many things which are happening around us. And one more point about the same thing. This is number 5. Who told you that life is meant for pleasure? Or on what basis you have concluded that life is about enjoyment and pleasure, and if it's not happening, God is evil? God never said this. He actually said the contrary. He said that we are going to definitely test all of you with the loss of your lives, with the loss of your health, with the loss of your loved one, with the loss of your fruits of your labor. He never said, our Creator never said this, that this life is meant for enjoyment and pleasure. Had it been the case that our Creator has said that this life is going to be a happy, peaceful, pleasure life, and then these things happening, then yes, it is a legitimate objection that how come? But he never said this. He said the contrary. He said this life is a test. I'm going to send all kind of situations in your life, and you will be tested. So all of these 5 things were just to achieve one purpose. And the purpose was, we can make other person realize that the approach they are having is a problematic approach. Because it is the whole issue of perspective. You need to give people some other perspective. If you simply try to answer their questions, you will answer one question, they'll bring 10 more. So that is why I always highlight this point, that try to give them some different perspective on life. So this is how Islam, and as most of you can see that almost all of these points, they are coming either from the Quranic verses or from the ahadith. And the reason I am not quoting all of that, I have mentioned before, because we are talking to a non-Muslim. For him, Quran and Sunnah is not the authority. Okay. So, but at the same time, Quran and Sunnah has given us a rational framework. It has given us this divine GPS. Inshallah, we can share with them this divine guidance. Let's move on. Now we are moving to the stage 2. That, okay, if, because obviously understand this point, our fundamental claim is, as a Muslim, that there are greater wisdoms behind all of those things which we are considering as evil or negative things. Now it's our responsibility then. We need to point out at least some of those wisdoms which people can appreciate. So let's inshallah dive into this topic now, that what are some of those wisdoms which are behind all of these negative events in life. So that is the principle. As a Muslim, this is our principle. What is the principle? There is no such thing as pure evil or absolute evil. There's no such thing. Even the shaitan is not a pure evil. And inshallah, if you have this question, we can discuss in the Q&A. Even this quote unquote evil entity, shaitan, cannot be labeled as pure evil or absolute evil. I gave this example before as well, that things are relative. For example, if 10 people apply for a job, 10 people, and there's one job vacancy, and there are 10 applicants, what will happen? 9 of them will be rejected and 1 of them will be accepted. And this happens all the time. Now this one event of fulfilling a job vacancy, with regard to those 10 applicants, for the one who has got the job, it was a good thing, because had those 9 people been not rejected, he would not have got this job. But if you look from the perspective of those 9 people, they would call this thing as a bad or evil thing. So what I'm trying to highlight is that it is the case of perspective. When you look at something from one perspective, it may appear evil. But if you look at the same thing, same event from a different perspective, then it is not the case. When we are getting sick, for example, and all of us get sick, Now, getting sick is obviously, everybody would say it's a bad thing, it's an evil thing, because health is the good thing, right? But the point is this: if somebody is not getting sick, his immune system will never be strong. In order to develop a strong immune system, this resilience inside of our bodies, sickness is important. Actually, it is necessary, because when we get sick and our body is fighting to recover, that's how our resilience and our immune system is developed. And that's why it is not necessarily a bad thing for our children when they are getting sick. Obviously, we do not ask Allah for sickness. We ask Allah for health. But what I'm trying to say is, with Allah's will, whenever we are getting sick, it is not necessarily a pure evil thing. There is element of bad or evil, which is our suffering when we are sick. But at the same time, there's element of goodness as well. And that is our resilience, our immune system. So remember this principle, that there's no such thing in this life which is pure evil. Things are relative. Okay, now let's move on to some of the wisdoms. If there is no such a thing as evil, which we call, or which we perceive as evil, how can we recognize what is good? For example, if we say that that person is a good person, how do you say this? Because there are people who are not good, and this makes you understand that what it means to be somebody, to a good person. As we all know, we cannot recognize night without the day, health without sickness, happiness without sadness. So what I'm trying to highlight is that is how our human brain or our human cognition works. That is the only way we can understand and appreciate things with their opposite. So in the absence of evil, how would you say something good? So that is one wisdom. That is one wisdom behind all of this perceived evil, that they help us to appreciate the good. If somebody never fell sick, never in their life, even though it's impossible, but just hypothetically speaking, this person who never falls sick, this person has no idea what it means to be healthy. You know why? Because health is actually the interval between two sicknesses. When you fall sick last time and when you are falling sick next time, in between that is health. What is happiness? It is actually an interval between two events of sadness, right? So without there being the opposite, you have no way to understand any concept in life. Let's move on. So these things which we call as evil things, they are the triggers. They are the triggers for our noble emotions of empathy, mercy, and care. Because we as human beings, we have a lot of potential to do something good, but that potential cannot be actualized if there's no vacuum out there. I gave the example of two people here. As we all know, the current Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, for example. We all know his story. He has told his story many times, that how his mother, she died with cancer. Now, please you tell me that somebody's mom dying in front of his eyes, in his hands with cancer. Can we ever say it is something good? From our human perspective, we cannot say it's good. It's evil, right? But this event, this evil or bad event, which happened in the life of this person, Imran Khan, This was a trigger which caused him to actually set up a world-class cancer hospital in a country like Pakistan. A world-class hospital. Now you think about this. Had it not been the case that this event happened in his life, the death of his mother with cancer, would he ever do this thing? Because this was not a small task. It was a huge task. He pretty much dedicated his life to achieve this goal. But all of that is because of that one negative event, which was the death of his mother with cancer. This triggered these emotions of empathy and care for others, and it ended up having this cause. One more example, a secular example, which most of non-Muslim they can appreciate. Example of Bill Gates. I mean, there was a problem out there, which was polio, this disease, okay? This triggered in this person that I should do something to eradicate this polio. And he has dedicated a big portion of his wealth in order to achieve this goal. And he has pretty much achieved this because his mission is to make this world free of polio. Now, this good, you can say this empathy and this care for others, this was already inside of this person. But there has to be something in the external world which we call as evil, and that thing in the external world, it serves as the trigger for those good emotions to be actualized. My brothers and sisters, if there are no people in the external world who need help, who are suffering with poverty and illnesses and whatnot, how the emotions and how the empathy and care of other people would ever be actualized? Because there has to be people out there who need your love and care and mercy. So this is another wisdom, that how these negative things, they work as the triggers to actualize our emotions. One more point, hardships are for our spiritual growth. I always give this example of a gym training. You know, when we go to the gym, in order to develop and strengthen our physical muscles, what do we do in the gym? We take pressures on our bodies. We are lifting weight. We are doing the push-ups and the pull-ups and whatnot. And obviously all of that is a painful process, right? But if you do not go through this painful process, you cannot develop your physical muscles, right? In the same way, we cannot be spiritually strong and grown up if there are no hardships coming in our life. Hardships and sufferings and all of these negative things in life, they are actually a gym for us to develop our spiritual muscles, to be spiritually strong, to be able to face the life. And this point number 4, I explained already, that this life is a test. And in order for us to be tested, we have to have both options in front of us, good and evil. Only then you can be tested. Because if there is no such a thing as which we call evil, what is the test? Because our free choice, our free will can only be tested if there are both options available. You can be living a morally upright life, and you can be living a life of a wicked person. So both options have to be there. Okay. And then one more point, inshallah, before I end. on the basis of problem of evil and suffering, if we want to reject God, then with all respect, our question is, then how would you explain all of these problems of evil and suffering? Because if you reject God, the phenomena of evil and suffering is still there. People are still suffering. How would you explain them? Because obviously, if you want to reject the framework of religion, then you have to have your own framework in order to explain these events in life. Is it just by chance that some people just happen to be enjoying life and some people just happen to be suffering? How would you explain all of that? And secondly, in the presence of belief in God, in the presence of belief in God, it gives meanings. It gives meanings to our sufferings. We have this solace and comfort that my Creator, He knows about my hardships. And these hardships are going to come to an end. And they are going to be addressed by my Creator. Because that is the whole point of afterlife. That every single thing is going to be accounted for. If you reject all of that and people are still suffering, and obviously in the absence of a creator and agent, there is no explanation, that it is all hopeless. Because when we are taking away this God explanation and we do not have any alternative, we are just throwing people into despair. So this was what I would use as an approach to address the problem of evil and suffering.